to welcome all of our attendees to our webinar on commercializing innovation using the SBA, Small Business Administration. I want to thank all of the attendees for coming. My name is Brian Darmody. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for the Association of University Research Parks. I'm coming to you from our DC area office in College Park, Maryland, in the University of Maryland Discovery District. Our other office where Team AURP is located is at the University of Arizona Tech Parks in Arizona. I'm here in the WeWork where the Small Business Development Center for the state of Maryland is co-located with us here in the University of Maryland Discovery District. I just point that out because we will be hearing from our representatives from the SBA. Next slide. So I want to thank sponsors for Association of University Research Parks. We are a nonprofit. We rely on memberships and sponsorships. And I want to thank our diamond sponsor, as I mentioned earlier, University of Arizona Tech Parks, where the main headquarters for AURP is located. Our platinum sponsors, Wexford Science and Tech, Whiting Turner, the University Financing Foundation, and Collaborative Real Estate, and our silver sponsors, North Carolina State Centennial Campus, Fraunhofer USA, a German organization has offices in the United States, Perkins and Will, HOK, King Abdul University of Science and Technology, Tech Economy Partners, Maryland Department of Commerce, Ventas, AstraZeneca, Research Triangle Park in North Carolina, and the Research Park at Auburn University. Next slide. So I wanted to give a plug for the AURP BioHealth Caucus, our showcase of state bioeconomies. If any of you are life science businesses or involved with life sciences, please go to our website and sign up for this the afternoon of June 8th, 2021. You can go to www.aurp.net and learn more about that. We're going to focus on 10 state bioeconomies and how working with research parks and universities, they are building their own local bioecosystems. Next slide. I also want to point out on October 19th, as a pre-conference to our international conference taking place in Utah, we will be doing an international conference on the role of aero and space tech in building communities of innovation. And if you look at this map of the US, you'll see lots of little dots. Those are either NASA research centers, large aerospace clusters, space grant, university space grant, universities, and other aerospace and space tech. And you can see it's pretty widely spread across the United States with the increasing investment in the civilian space investments. You're seeing a lot of economic development in your local communities, SBIR and STTR funding coming from NASA, Department of Energy, and other federal agencies in building space tech. So please consider signing up for our aerospace conference on October 19th, 2021. We'll be in Utah, and you'll be hearing from some reps from Utah at the end of this webinar. And please contact me if you have ideas on topics to present or people that might want to sponsor that conference. Next slide. And related to that, so we were really proud that the International Space Station joined AURP as our first orbiting member. So as many of you know, a lot of commercial experiments are now going on in the microgravity environment of the space station. So ISS, the International Space Station, as well as senior administrators from NASA will be at that conference in Salt Lake in October. Next slide. So with that, I'm going to move on to our first speaker, Brittany Sickler. She's a Senior Innovation Policy Advisor in the SBA Office of Innovation and technology, and she's worked with AURP on many projects over the years. And it's great to see you again, Brittany. And so I look forward to hearing your presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brian. I'm very excited to be here with everyone today, so appreciate all the folks who are taking their time to show up. We have quite a bit of fantastic information in store when we talk about commercializing innovation, SBA's role, and all of the amazing things that bright ideas can actually do if they can come to fruition. So I'm Brittany. I'm going to start off with some slides here in just a moment on the Small Business Innovation Research and Technology Transfer, SBIR and STTR programs. We're going to go in, actually, hopefully you can stick around the whole time, to actually meet some companies that have participated in the program and especially talk about their forays into the international market. But before we get there, I'm going to kind of go through a little bit of a foundation setting for the program, because I know we have a lot of different experiences on the call in relation to SBIR and STTR. And I'll probably just go and say SBIR for the most part, talking about both, and I'll explain that here why in just a bit. And before I dive in, also want to make note that we have the chat box if you want to have a conversation, bring up things for the whole group. And we also have a Q&A area. And so I will try to keep an eye on the Q&A and maybe able to answer some things in motion. But if not, hopefully I'll catch that here before the end of our session today. So I'm with SBA's Office of Investment and Innovation. We're this coordinating hub across those programs. There are many federal agencies, I'll also mention, that participate in SBIR and STTR. In SBA, we do not actually have this funding, but as an agency that's really looking to help small businesses start and grow, we're the ones that are setting policy. We're working across how those programs, the fundamentals of how they run. And we're also supporting a lot of these organizations, entities, networks that end up helping potential applicants and awardees. So I know on the call today, we have a mixture of folks. Some of you may actually be a company, maybe you've already participated, maybe you're interested. Some of you may be looking at your organization, your university, your accelerator, and want to help some of your companies be more successful. So today's presentation hopefully will give you a good foundation for that. The next slide. For SBIR, STTR, you know, there's a lot of different opinions and probably different experiences with the program. So just to say, we're going to have only a small overview, but you know, to bring it all together, really what the funding is trying to do is really help startups, small businesses be able to take really high risk, new ideas, typically high impact technologies, and take them from lab to market. So turn them into actual products and services and solving these big problems. And so we're going to hear some of those stories, and I'm very excited to get into that here shortly. But on the next slide, you know, why do we care about these acronyms when we're getting into the government speak? Really, when we're looking at new technologies, new innovations, I think all of us can agree, if you're here today, that STEM, the STEM area does affect every aspect of our lives. All of the advancements in science, technology, engineering, there's many things that are around us today, the platforms we're on right now, that were built by great minds and started with some what at the time were probably very big ideas. However, for all of the successes, there's also a lot of challenges and things that don't or haven't happened. And so we look at the challenges, particularly on the financial piece. And so being able to access funding for a high-risk startup when you're looking at venture, angels, personal resources. SBIR is also known as America's Seed Fund because it has now become, at over $4 billion a year, the largest non-dilutive source of capital in the US. So any of the companies involved are not giving up any equity in exchange for the funding. The next slide. When we're talking about technology, obviously, there's many things that you all might be thinking of. And to be honest, when you look at the agencies involved, there's many technologies that they're funding. But just to give you an idea of what does an SBIR company look like, you could think, oh, solar energy might not be as novel anymore. Many of you might even have solar energy. I have camping lights that are inflatable that I take with me. And but here we have a company that's developed a transparent screen, so a window that is also solar or capturing solar energy. That was funded by the National Science Foundation. The next slide, we have a company that has the Navigator, sub-UAS, going into air and water in terms of drone and being able to access all sorts of areas. This company was with us at CES last year, back early 2020, in Eureka Park, and was able to kind of showcase their innovation to thousands of folks on the show floor there. Next up, Brian's talking about space. Made in Space was actually the first additive manufacturing company on the space station. And so they've done some fantastic work over the year and over the years working with NASA. So even beyond these companies, so solar, we're going to actually, go through some of the other companies or with Tony and Jennifer later. But there's everything from materials, agriculture, education. And that's because if you go to the next slide, we have agencies involved that are looking at their mission areas. Some of those mission areas, they want to use these SBIR innovations directly in the work that they do. So both SBIR and STTR are programs at the Department of Defense, Energy. You can see Health and Human Services. Most folks would know that by the National Institutes of Health, NIH, along with a couple others under that umbrella, NASA, and then the National Science Foundation. Well, not all of those, though, are actually going to be using the innovations that are produced through SBIR. National Science Foundation, for instance, they're not going out on missions to the same extent that NASA and Defense does, but they are still interested in pushing the boundaries of certain technological areas. And so as you start to dive into their programs, you'll see this come through. It's very clear in how they talk about the opportunities, and also how we try to help folks understand, is SBIR going to be an option? Should I look at this kind of funding? So these are the 5 largest, and that's why they're part of both programs. On the next slide, we have a whole slew of other agencies that don't have a large enough external R&D budget. So that's how Congress has decided with the legislation. SBIR and STTR are mandated for these agencies to have, based on this high level of R&D investment. And so the decision was made that a certain percentage of that would go to small businesses to hopefully be agile enough, right, to take that creativity and be able to turn it again into that marketable product or service, so that it could get into the hands of, if not those agency personnel, then into the hands of people across the country. So the agencies I mentioned before, they're the ones that have the largest external investments into R&D, and so they have a certain percentage set aside for those SBIR and STTR programs. And here you'll see that Department of Agriculture, Education, the EPA, Homeland Security, NIST and NOAA under the Department of Commerce, even the Department of Transportation, funding a wide range of really interesting projects. So whether it has to do with highway safety, it could have to do with educational technologies. In fact, the Department of Education in just another month is having a huge ed tech event where they're featuring, I believe, over 80 SBIR funded educational technologies that are currently in our world today. So in the school system and at home. On the next slide, we're going to now move into a little bit on the funding piece. So actually moving forward here, this is probably the most wonkiest slide I have today. If you'll see on the next slide, there's a graph, kind of goes through all the budgets. So I'm talking about the 5 largest. I just want to give everyone an idea of what that means. And not that it's translating to what's easier or harder necessarily for folks to access, but understanding that they're not all going to have the same number of topics or the same numbers of awards or the process. So much of what we try to do is help people kind of break down, how do I get to know the agencies? They're almost like people in a sense, where they have their own personality, their own style. And even though we kind of bring them together of that same fabric of how they operate, even just by size, you can see that the way that they run their programs is going to shift according to their budget. So here you can see that about half of the agencies, or a little over half, I guess if the color's showing up all right, are blue, and those are contracting agencies, and the ones in red are the granting agencies. So one thing I always like to point out is that SBIR, STTR awards, we call them awards for that reason. They're not all grants. They're definitely not loans, as we talk about the non-dilutive funding. But some of the agencies are contracting agencies, some are granting agencies, and there's just going to be a slight change in how that is approached. And so we actually have a little bit of information on that on SBIR.gov as well in the tutorials. But you can see here that well, I guess I don't have the total listed, but it is over $4 billion a year. Just 4 years ago, it was about $2.5 billion. And so it's been growing as those external R&D budgets have been growing, which is translating to more awards to companies across the country. So the next slide, there's just a little bit of background. I don't want to go too far into the weeds, but we do talk about phases with SBIR. And so when you look at SBIR STTR funding, phase 1, phase 2 is where you're going to see that come into play from the agencies. You might hear phase 0 mentioned, and that's typically a pre-proposal support that could be sponsored by an agency, often sponsored by state organizations. So many of you probably have some phase 0 support where there actually might be a payment to help put together a really competitive proposal. But really that phase 1 is where the proof of concept is taking place, where you're looking to develop, even the initial stages of what you want to develop. And then separately is to also compete for phase 2. And really the range is going to vary. Phase 1 is anywhere from 50,000 up to about 250. Phase 2, anywhere from 500,000 to 1.7 million. And then just to make things more interesting, several agencies also have some pilot programs. And so there can be some follow-on phase 2, some additional supplemental funding. And so once you start to target what an agency might be a good fit for you, then it's really a good idea to look at what are they actually able to do? Should you need additional funding? Because if they're not necessarily set up for that, that could present some challenges in your path in the future. The next set of slides, we'll move forward here, and I don't want to spend too long on this, but just on the STTR side, on the next slide, a bit of a difference between the two, because most folks are curious, what are these programs, what is even the difference? And the main difference is that STTR is requiring participation from a nonprofit research institution. And so you'll see that there's different percentage requirements here on the slide. I will say many SBIR awards also include numerous kinds of support, whether it's a subcontract to a university or some other kind of lab research institution. But on the STTR side, it does afford a little bit more flexibility. So actually, if we move to the next slide, it's not that one is better than the other, I would say. There might be other opinions out there. Feel free to put them in the chat. Obviously, SBIR has a lot more funding. If you go back to that, just thinking back to that budget side, SBIR is over $3 billion, STTR at just under 500 million. But really, we'll stay here on the what is better side. But it sometimes can be really helpful for that small business to have a strong tie with the university. So obviously, we have a mix here on the call today. So really providing a good way for you to be able to work together. And if there's issues with who is the employer of a principal investigator, STTR does allow a little bit more flexibility to be able to take in a principal investigator without having them be fully employed, or at least once you get down into the weeds, you can see, well, how is this company actually going to be the company? Because in both cases, for both SBIR and STTR, the small business is the applicant and the awardee. So in any case, you're going to have the university involved or any kind of other research group. Not that the contribution will be any less, but they're not actually able to be the applicant. And I mean, looking to the names of the programs, Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer, these programs really are about that entrepreneurial drive and seeing the creation and growth of companies through the program. All right, so let's focus just a few minutes now on applying for funding, because that's typically another area that's a challenge to get through. Let's just say, moving to the next slide here, the thing I want to touch on is that, we're going to be talking today about all the international opportunities, but one important thing to note for SBIR is that the companies receiving funding must be, well, a small business, like I mentioned, so for profit, majority US owned and operated. So you'll have to, if you have a mixture in terms of your ownership structure, to be 51% US owned and operated, and then meet those small business size standards under 500 people. Work also has to be done in the US. There's a few exceptions, and so that's something that can be discussed with an actual program manager at an agency once that's been narrowed down. But the goal is for the research to be done in the US, not that it will stay there in terms of whatever is developed. And then the focus is on performing R&D. So that's a typical one in terms of a confusion or a question, because some folks have already spent time developing. And what you might find an SBIR opportunity where you're adjusting that. For instance, let's say you've developed an amazing technology here on Earth, and now you're looking at its use on the space station. There might be a NASA opportunity for that, for you to be able to tweak that technology. But if you're kind of set and good to go, and you're just looking for some additional capital to, let's say, manufacture, that's where you're not going to find those SBIR dollars. They are R&D dollars. And though there may be some supplemental dollars to help commercialize, they're not going to be straight up to help you get that to market. Hopefully you're able to find some of that assistance elsewhere. We'll move through the next here pretty quick. On the next slide, topic searches, that's a great place to go. It's very interesting to see who is funding what. So you can kind of type in some of your topic areas on SBIR.gov. And the next slide, continuing with the process, the SBIR program isn't something that you can just fill out one form, at least currently. So each agency has their own funding opportunity solicitation process. It's a term that's used for what you would be applying for. Some agencies might have a rolling way, like the National Science Foundation, where you can be submitting your ideas. But most agencies are going to have very set times and windows. And also, most agencies have more specific topics. So even though you might have a great solution for, let's say, the Department of Homeland Security, if it doesn't fit in their current SBIR area, unfortunately, they're not going to be able to make an exception. I'm going to move on a little bit here in terms of solicitations. You can also go to those tutorials to find out about the agencies and their processes. You're going to want to obviously read through anything in the solicitation very carefully before applying. And another key thing to point out, I'll have a little bit more information later, is that we've really been developing or increasing our training and funding for organizations to provide great assistance. So you can also use our local assistance tool to hopefully find some folks, whether it's mentors or kind of established groups, that can really make that process a lot easier. Moving down, here's kind of the approximate schedule. As I was mentioning, everyone has such different solicitations. We do have this on SBIR.gov as well, but you can kind of check out. It can shift at times, and you can see at least how you're able to structure. All right, Brittany, I looked at the topic areas, I did my registration, I'm a fit for SBIR, and now I see that there's a due date next week for transportation. That's going to be a tall order. It does take a long time to put together a proposal, and depending on who you have on your team and your experience with that, it really can be tough. So moving to the next slide, and honestly, I don't want to go too much into this because I think that Tony and Jennifer can really shed more light on this, but there's a lot of different skills that go into putting together those proposals. really understanding the needs of the agency, the needs of the program. Also, what is your technology, your innovation going to do? So for National Science Foundation, as I said before, they're not going to purchase it. They run grants. They're wanting that innovation to have a strong commercial impact. And so you really have to go in with this commercialization plan already, well thought out for you to be able to be competitive. They want to know that this is actually going to take off, and if successful, going through your research. Whereas other agencies might say, well, on the phase one, you don't have to have your full commercialization plan. We know that this fits in with a need, that we have at NASA, for instance. And then there might be some additional help to move the company along through their commercialization challenges once they actually get started. On the next slide, we have the elements of an application. So typically it's called the technical proposal. That can shift, but in a general setting, that's what we're talking about when you're putting together what your plan is, what you'd be developing. You'll definitely need that qualified principal investigator. And so that doesn't necessarily, a principal investigator doesn't need, let's say, a minimum level of education, but they do need to be able to perform the work that is being proposed. So you'll often see, depending on the technology area, that they're going to be fairly advanced in an academic sense, and or very experienced in their field. And so many groups, you might have folks that you work with that are probably more on the entrepreneur side who are looking to fill in technical expertise, or vice versa. When putting together a team, regardless, it's about looking at, who do I have here that can, meet all of these elements of the application, from the things that you're turning in to the work that you're performing. Next slide. It is a very competitive program, and so while we try to share the word to have more people apply, we also want to see, more competitive proposals, because, I don't think any of us would like people to spend their time already set up to not be able to succeed. So, there's a lot of reasons for rejection. You're going to have to follow those instructions, and we do talk about even everything about turning in and due dates. Sometimes I joke with folks that they should almost think of it like a wedding, in a sense, where if you show up half an hour late, you probably missed the ceremony. And so there are some agencies that are very strict, I would say most of them, in terms of those deadlines and even what's included. Next slide, in terms of winning an award, there's going to be a different percentage, actually, win rate across the agencies. And so if you're really curious about what that means, we have annual reports on SBIR.gov. The latest is from 2018, but we actually go into those percentages down across the agencies, and for DoD down into the components. We can average that across for about 15%. So some of our groups that we're working with are actually supporting entrepreneurs, and they'll have a 50% success rate, let's say, but it does vary depending on the agency, and then obviously on the team structure and how competitive their proposal is. Now, just my last few slides, we'll move through talking about we're here to help. On the next one, I've been mentioning the tutorials. So those are really easy to click through. And so you can go check out if there's any topics there that are of interest. On the next slide is where I had been mentioning local assistance. And so you can look through any state or territory and see if there's groups in your area that can help. I specifically want to mention the FAST, the Federal and State Technology Partnership Program. Those are organizations that we're funding that have very explicit support for potential applicants. And so if you have a FAST group in your state, I highly recommend reaching out to them. On the next slide, for those of you who are representing, let's say, a university, an accelerator, some other kind of entrepreneur support organization, I also recommend you staying in touch with us, because we're about to release a funding opportunity for you, just over $5 million in prizes, both two tracks, both trying to help again, STEM R&D entrepreneurs and SBIR catalysts, particularly in this inclusive innovation ecosystem. So how can we encourage participation for more women and minority entrepreneurs? The next slide actually is also targeted for the entrepreneur support organizations. And so not for companies, I apologize, but for groups trying to help. I run a monthly call where we are going through a variety of guest speakers and talking about really interesting programs and also updates from the agencies. So please feel free to shoot me an email if you're interested in joining. And then my last couple slides are just on the successes, which you can see some big names on the slide, but there's so many other companies that have done amazing work, and you might not recognize their name, but you probably recognize their impact in your life. And so I do always encourage folks to think big when you think about SBIR, thinking about all these investments that the federal government is making and how it is definitely making an impact on not only our economy, but on the way we live our lives. And so to wrap up my whirlwind, hopefully you've been able to learn some new things or take away at least a few pieces of what SBIR means. It's not just a slew of acronyms, but really represents a lot of possibility. And you can go obviously to sbir.gov to learn more. You can follow us on Twitter. And we have a new or newly revived newsletter. We're really trying to pack in as much as I probably did today, if not more every month. And you can keep in the loop that way. But thanks so much for all the activity and in the chat, the Q&A. I'll try to be in touch with you through the rest of today. And thank you so much, Brian, for inviting us to be here.
Well, thanks, Brittany. That was great. I know there's a lot of information, but with a $4 billion plus program, there's a lot of details. I think there was a couple questions in the chat. I'm sorry, in the Q&A. There's one in the chat about overall. Is there any overall limit for any one company to get SBIR funding, or assuming there is obviously a limit per agency, but there's an overall limit, like funding from different agencies?
Sure. No, there are companies that have different awards, even at the same time. There's companies that you can actually apply with the same technology to multiple agencies, but should you be really lucky and then be accepted, you can only actually accept funding from one. You can't be funded double for the same work. But if your company is large enough and you have a few different things going on, there's not necessarily a limit in the awards you get at one time, but then you do open up some requirements in terms of commercialization, in terms of making sure that the companies are actually spinning out. So you will reach a threshold where you can't just be taking an award, and not actually having that company be performing in a sense. So that's all on sbir.gov if you're curious about it's called the commercialization benchmark.
Well, good. I know that there was one question. Brittany, can you post your email again, or if people want to follow up, Should they follow up with you, or should they follow up with the SBA Office of Innovation? What's your advice there?
Sure. I'll actually recommend that technology at sba.gov. I can also put mine here, although I'll be running our prize competition, and so I fear that I might be giving some delayed responses. So you can also send it to both.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, great. We greatly appreciate that. It was a great discussion. Our research parks have a lot of large companies, but they have thousands of small companies. And so if you're in a research park and you haven't availed yourself of the SBIR or STTR program, I think you have a lot of information here. And then if you're not a research park and you've just joined this webinar, again, this is open to anyone as long as you're a small business, right? Brittany, you have to be, the first cut is a small business. Okay, with that.
And the last thing.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Brian. I was just saying the last thing I'll add is that, speaking of small business, obviously a requirement, but there's so many other people and institutions that are needed to make it a success. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for research parks, and I'm hoping that we can start tracking some of that success here into the future.
Yes, because obviously we have universities, and as you mentioned, the STTR program often ties to a university. So feel free to reach out to us if we can help. And thank you, Brittany. So the other way small businesses can be helped by the SBA is on international markets, exporting. And that's another avenue that you have if you're a small business, and 95% of the market is outside the US. And so the SBA also has a group of people that help you get involved with exports. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Eddie Mahan from the State Trade Expansion Program of the SBA. And you'll learn, just like with the SBIR program, there's opportunities here with the SBA on international expansion. So Eddie.
Thank you, Brian. And what a great presentation, Brittany. There was just so much information, and I hope everybody watching this webinar sticks around. It's being recorded, as it was said earlier, and also we have a Q&A where we can go through a lot more details on what each program is. And I'll explain a little bit more about another acronym, STEP, which is a State Trade Expansion Program. And it's a grant program that can help small businesses export. We can help offset the cost related to your exporting. But I have the pleasure of actually interviewing two companies that have been with the SBIR program and will share their experience and how they arrived to SBIR. And also there's a little surprise in there regarding STEP, all of them. So let me share with you. We have Anthony Mulligan, who's the CEO and president of Hydronolix. And he'll explain to you a little bit about his company, and also Jennifer Wu, who is the CEO and president of Economies. Anthony, can we start with you? Could you introduce yourself and give us a little description about your company and your product and how you came to be with SBIR?
Hi, first, thank you for having me. My company, Hydronolix, we founded it back in 2009 after I'd sold a previous company which built drones, and we sold it to a large prime. And our basic fundamental idea at the time was the US government has spent hundreds and hundreds of millions, if not billions, on developing small unmanned vehicle technology. And our thought was, could we convert this over to small water robots to take advantage of all of that capability? And so in 2009, we started with a CRADA, and we use our own investment and our own sweat equity with NOAA to look for marine mammals. And then the following year, my partner, Bob Lautrup, and I came up with this cool innovation of using these small, super tough boats to rescue people in the water. And that became a product that we sell around the world now called Emily. It's basically a robotic lifeguard. So if you're drowning in the river or a rip current in the ocean, and after another 6 or 7 months of refining and exploring the technology, we applied for our first SBIR programs. And in 2010, we won our first SBIR, which was our first source of outside revenue. And that allowed us to get an office space in Southern Arizona, a little town called Sarita. And it allowed us to hire our first employee. So felt pretty good to get our first employee.
Wow, that's very interesting. And so you're located in Arizona?
Yeah, about halfway between Tucson and the border to Mexico. So it's Excellent. A little town which does copper mining and farming. And
selling an accidental product that you didn't originally begin, but that's actually, so you've been a member of SBIR or with SBIR since 2010, you said you won your first?
Hydronolix won its first SBIR in 2010. In my previous business, I had won my first SBIR in 1989.
So much to what Brittany said earlier, it's an investment, it's a partnership, it's long-term because you're still there. You know, and let me introduce Jennifer Wu, who can tell us about Economies and her experience and her particular background. Jennifer, yes, if you're on.
Hi.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and your company and how you became a member with SBIR.
Sure. Hi, Jennifer Hu. I'm the co-founder, president, and CEO of Economies. Economies develops and manufactures specialty electronics for broadband communication, for intelligent lighting and building. And currently, we are developing a third product line, which is electronics can operate in very harsh environments. And before I started my small business, I was a professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering of the University of Utah. And so when I started my small business, I quickly realized that in terms of the technical know-hows, we are definitely competing very well and possibly better than the large corporations. However, there are two areas we simply cannot easily compete with these large corporations. And one area is the continuous investments of research and development of new technology and new products. And the second area being, again, continuous investments of market research to stay on top of what is new technology needed and what's its new products the customer needs. And so I quickly come to realize SBIR is one of those best tools to help me to make up what a small business might be lack of. And so so we participated in SBIR, not only to have the funding to develop new technologies and products so we can best serve our customer needs, but also to stay in the know of what is the new market trend and what is the customer needs. I don't know whether everybody knows this. SBIR typically look at the technology and the products needs 3 to 5 years ahead of the defense market requirements. And then on top of that, defense markets typically leads commercial markets by another 3 to 5 years. So by participating in SBIR, you really have not only the funding, but you also have the timeline for you to really get ready for the new technology needs and the new market trend. And as a result, that's why we went from broadband communication into the intelligent building and lighting, and now we are working on harsh environment electronics.
Wow. Fascinating. And how long have you been with SBIR?
I probably somewhere around 14 years. Yeah.
14 years. So it's really not just about offering grants and money and then just you're on your own. It's really a partnership.
Yes.
And it's an investment in both parts. So yeah. I will, because I saw that slide where it said it's not all about you. I guess once you're selected, it is all about you.
Yeah.
So that's wonderful. And Anthony, how many markets are you operating in right now or selling to?
We have distribution in about 35 countries right now, and we have operations going on in nearly 50 countries. I think our ability to be in so many places is the core technology, which the Office of Naval Research and NAVAIR funded, is just superior to what other people can get anywhere else in the world. But we're all over the place, anywhere there's water.
Anywhere there's water. Okay, 3/4 of the earth. Yeah. Jennifer, how about yourself? How many markets have you been, you said harsher environments, like where?
Yeah, so So actually, the technology we have started to exporting is actually our broadband communications. Our broadband communication electronics being wireless and being high power, it can reach, it can help to connect almost any corners of the world, and including those very remote ones. And this allow these people in these very remote corners to be able to get the same information, carry the same communications as those living in a very busy city has, all kinds of communication systems they can adapt into. And so, our global market, even in each global, country we export to, is really huge. And that's why we always take, our approach is to take it steadily, and once we are in a country, we tend to be very focused, and so take a step at a time. And so we are only in Germany and Japan, and it's somewhere close to 30% of our total business.
Now, I work with exporters every day, and I love asking this question: is what did the market demand pull you into exporting, or was it accidental, or was there intent in your mission statement or in your business plan?
I think initially, definitely, it's the demands pulling us in. But then very soon we realize we are the one need to manage this. So we actually need to come up with a very good plan and approach this global market carefully.
That's fascinating, because I see that you are both out there saving lives with your products. And Anthony, how about yourself as far as the exporting of your product? Because you originally didn't start with this, it became this product, and now you're in 35 countries, which is amazing.
Yeah, we were pulled. We had no experience with export. When we were still developing, we had a customer from South Korea come to visit us to outfit the South Korean Coast Guard. And he came with this big bag of money, and he bought everything we had in the building. And we took that money and went to the bank to make sure it wasn't counterfeit and counted right. And then a couple months later, the Indonesian Ministry of Search and Rescue sent one of their distributors or suppliers to meet with us. And they had a much bigger bag of money. I think it was like $1.5 million. And, but we started realizing, like, wow, some of those years we could range between 60 and 70% of our sales would be export. And so that's when we decided we should really learn how to do this and commit to it and get all the help we could.
That's fascinating. I mean, congratulations to both of you, because making the decision to export is, it's not always the easiest, but there is support. And you could see that you have it at SBIR, and I have plenty to share at the end. And I hope that people watching this webinar also get a chance to visit your website and see your actual products, because it really is a credit to what you both do. And I know I'm looking at your background, Anthony, and I thought that's what the yellow bubble in the back, I thought maybe that was a picture of one of your products, because they're roughly about that size, and they have I've seen the video, so I know, which just blows my mind, living on the East Coast and being water right next to me. So good. And Jennifer, back to you. I wanted to ask a particular question. In addition to SBIR and the assistance that you received there, right? Because there's other offices, agencies, the decision to go abroad, and some of the product lines that you are both in can be, if you're selling to military or to Coast Guard or to search and rescue. Can you give us an example of some of the other offices that you've worked with? Because again, everybody in the federal government wants your success. And I think it's important for everybody watching this to also understand that it's not just, you don't just belong to one organization. There's other agencies out there.
Yes, actually, being a small business in a very high-tech field, I do feel I'm pressured to be resourceful. And so I have successfully tapped into the STEP program you mentioned earlier, in the beginning. And in fact, I used the STEP program to not only perform markets analysis, but also deep dive into those countries I'm interested in entering. And so I have a really clear picture of, what I need to do and what I might want to avoid before I, kind of step my foot into it. And I also last year, because of the COVID-19, and so came to realize internet presence is more important than any of us probably thought about. And so I actually use the STEP program to help to, this is for my second line of products. So I use the STEP program to help me to develop a website and focus on e-commerce and also SEO, the search engine optimization. And, so it just, be honest with you, I consider myself very resourceful, but I believe there are still a lot of things the STEP program can help me. I haven't explored yet. So yeah, so that's my experience.
Fascinating. And the STEP program, you're in Utah, you're working with the World Trade Center in Utah?
Yes.
Good. They operate the STEP grant in the state of Utah, and what a great program. So if you're there, and you should apply for the grant. Anthony, you're in Arizona, and I know you have a story to tell also of your experience. And I'm not asking the question so that you talk about STEP only. I know that you've all worked with so many different agencies. Can you share some of them?
Yeah. So in addition to the vital support from the Navy on SBIRs and NOAA, we also worked when we first started closely with the U.S. Foreign Trade Office. So we've been really lucky that the staff here in Tucson are very gifted and really understood how to help us, which you'll find in most cases, it's really a person-to-person interaction. In the case of Arizona, we're also lucky because we have a thing called the Arizona Commerce Authority, and they administer the STEP and the MEP, and they've been very helpful for us for improving our manufacturing efficiency on the MEP side, but then on the STEP side, the really high value added, the STEP program supported us on how to be culturally sensitive for our boats. So for instance, in Middle Eastern countries or Indonesia, our boats have a red crescent instead of a red cross. And in Western countries, we have a red cross. In Israel, we have a red Star of David. And you don't want to alienate your customers or scare them. And then things like helping us build brochures and catalogs where our foreign brochures and catalogs, not only the translation, but incorporating pictures from their local areas. So for instance, in Dubai, we have, or in UAE, our catalogs have iconic pictures of the region. In Europe, they have iconic pictures throughout Europe, whether it's in France or England. And then for Asia, like Thailand or Indonesia, we have catalogs specific for that, in addition to what our distributors can do. The other thing is STEP was super valuable in helping us go to many trade shows, far more than we could afford, because and even if we could afford it, it wouldn't have been as productive as it was when we went with STEP, because we would go with the Arizona delegation, we would get to hang out with the US delegation, and then we could use that high-end government credibility, so to speak, to support our distributors in those countries. So then we could meet with the appropriate government officials in each of those countries. And immediately upon meeting with them, we had their local citizen distributors, so they could feel good about, they could then directly buy through a local company in that country. And so it's, you wouldn't have that kind of support if you just buy a booth and go to Paris or just go to Bahrain or to Singapore. And then plus the delegation, there's a lot of smart people and a lot of other smart companies, and it gives you a chance to interact and learn other ideas. But it's, in our case, it's been extremely valuable. And I'll attribute some of that. We have some gifted program managers that do the STEP program in Arizona. I'd like to throw out Kevin O'Shea for all the good work that he's been doing.
Yes.
But there's many, many great people all throughout that have been helping us.
That's great. You know, and right after this, before we end, I actually have a couple of slides that I'm going to share with everybody that has contact information and what the grant can be used for. So I want to leave a minute for that. But I want to close with this because, again, exporting it can be accidental. You can be an accidental exporter, but to really experience it and to really be successful, you really have to be committed and invested. And what would be that one piece of advice that you would want the audience watching now, if I would have known then what I know now, when it comes to doing international business, besides being supported by SBIR, what would that be? What would you say?
In our case, it would be,
as I lean in, and listen, this is a gold nugget.
Yeah, in our case, it would be that you have to realize that you're competing against the whole global economy, and all these other people in these other countries, they don't like you. And every bit of help you can get from Big Brother, from the US government, is really needed. So just because you're asking for help doesn't mean you're not strong, but there's some really powerful competition, and other countries greatly support their companies. And so you need to be at that political level if you're going to have sustained business. And building relationships with multiple agencies, and especially tying with access to the State Departments and the embassies, that's been, I think, our key to growing our export business.
Wow, that is incredible. That's a great point. Jennifer, how about yourself? What would be that one piece of advice that you would want to share with companies that are watching this, that are either new to export or getting into the market exporting, or just idly waiting for COVID-19 to be post-COVID world?
My one advice will be take time to understand the market that you are entering, and you can develop such understanding through steps, help in a big way, but do take time to understand the market and do develop a best strategy in terms of entering a market. For example, like I mentioned, we decided to B2B type of interaction, and we do believe that that's the best one for us and easiest one for us to manage. And the global, business can be large and sometimes huge, and as a result, the risk is also high. And so, really take time to understand, what you plan to do and what you are going to do when you get there. And STEP program is one way to accomplish some of those understanding. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much. Now, don't go away. I want to thank you both for your time. You've been most generous and with the information, and so that people watching the businesses watching the webinar right now can also see success stories that are within SBIR. But that is also a great segue into the STEP program, which is a program that I'm the director of the State Trade Expansion Program here at SBA. And immediately, I came to SBA late last year. Immediately before, I was actually a grantee, a state director for the state of New Jersey. So we received grants from SBA and we help companies export their products. So I've seen firsthand working with businesses and helping them develop their international business plan. And I could tell you that there is a bridge from the United States all around that encircles the world that if you tap into through the Commercial Service, through the Department of Commerce, through the State Department, through all the agencies that were mentioned before, you could practically interlock arms around the globe, and they're there to help you, to support you. So if you're considering exporting, you're not the first and you won't be alone. So let me tell you a little bit about the program. The grant program that I run is fascinating and unique because it can wrap itself around all the other existing offices. We've worked with veteran-owned business, women-owned business, minority-owned businesses. SBIR, one of the companies that Brittany mentioned, it showed a slide of, is from New Jersey. I actually had worked with them before. So this grant can help almost every business that is looking to export in other, and maybe a part of another agency or another office or another funding opportunity. So, we try not to duplicate funds, of course, but the way the grant works is it's a competitive grant to states, and states administer it at the local level with businesses. And I saw the question come in before. It's the World Trade Center of Utah is who manages the grant in the state of Utah. Not every state receives funding. They have to apply and compete. But right now there are 48 states and territories that have funding. So the best way to find out if your state or where you are have STEP grants, you can visit our website, which is there at the bottom of this slide, sba.gov/STEP. And there you'll see a list of all the grantees around the country, and you can apply directly to them. Now, and again, the states administer it locally, so it varies from state to state slightly. But across the board, we have a $10,000 grant for e-commerce to develop. You both talked about developing your website. And that is right now, as the world waits for the post-COVID world to begin, and we're living in this virtual world, that has been tapped into a lot all across the country. States are at an all-time high with funding, and more funding is coming. And grants vary by amount, by state. You'd have to call individual states to find out, but none of them are less than a few $1,000s up to $20,000, $25,000 per company per grant cycle. And the STEP grant can be used for just about anything that a business would need as they begin to export. And right now, Jennifer just mentioned, being online, having a secure website, a complete ability to be able to sell your product all across the world from your website and secure it. The grant can be used to increase your cybersecurity in your web presence, in your web store. You can also, this is a very technology-based audience. So intellectual property is always a particular item that has a lot of fees and costs. All of those can be covered through the STEP grant. Everything that is available in person is also available virtual. So trade shows, trade missions, and Jonathan mentioned, they went with a delegation from Arizona, but at the international event, you also become part of the US delegation that may be in that particular trade show or trade event. So for example, the booth cost to attend a industry trade show or exhibit for one of your products can be covered through STEP. In addition to that, everything that follows. So Jennifer mentioned earlier about, where not to go is sometimes just as important as to where to go. Well, finding that out out of your pocket is very painful and very costly. And you're not going to make that mistake too many times. So that is, that is where the STEP grant can help you, because it can help you through the commercial service do a lot of the searches. I'm going to move on now to our next slide. And again, we'll be available for question and answer, and the slides will be shared, and everything is on our website. But I also want to let everybody know that the SBA has a lot more than just grants. We have a team of professionals all across the country. We can help anywhere from the business intelligence for the changing times, the grants, which I just talked to you about, and then also financing your international initiatives. We have a team of export finance managers all across the country that are there to help you. And the best way to get in contact with anybody, in the next slide, please, you'll see that all of our offices are listed here. You can visit and get information, application, a list of where you can go, and then also you can explore opportunities through our newly released SBA.gov/trade tools. Trade tools is a great source of information for everyone. And there is a Spanish version available. I did not know that. That is fantastic. So again, I want to thank Jennifer and Anthony for your time and really your experience, and I applaud you and the initiative that you have taken in exporting, and I wish for all of your success and everyone else watching this. So let me now turn it over to, I believe, David. David, you're coming on, and thank you very much.
Very good. Well, thank you very much, Eddie, and thank you, Brian, for including me. It's an honor and a real privilege to be able to speak to you all. I am David Karlbach with the World Trade Center of Utah, which has been mentioned now a few times. And I'm here to talk to you a little bit about Utah and about the event that was mentioned earlier by Brian, the AURP International Conference later this year. To start though, could we go to the next slide? Is it? Yeah, I just wanted to say a word or two about Utah and then come back to the conference. As you may know, certainly we here in Utah know, Utah has been doing extremely well from an economic perspective. You can see some of the accolades here. I'll just call out a few that we've been called the #1 state in the country for entrepreneurs by Amazon. We've been rated one of the best states for business by Forbes. We were #3 recently, but we've been in the top 3 for 14 years in a row. And probably most relevant to this topic today, we've also been rated #5 in terms of our commercialization ecosystem by the Milken Institute very recently. And so I just wanted to share a little bit about how that is. And a lot of that has to do with the state's demographics. We're young and well-educated. We're the youngest state in the country with the lowest median age of 31. But there's also a very strong spirit of innovation and entrepreneurship in the state that's been fostered by our general culture and by our state government. A lot of that goes back to our pioneer roots with the LDS Church. And there's also a very strong social cohesion and sense of trust, and then teamwork that goes with that. And it's not just person to person, but among public, NGO, and private institutions. We call that Team Utah, and they really do play a role in helping the state succeed, as you see on this page. If you could turn the page, one of the members of Team Utah, hopefully a strong member of Team Utah, is the World Trade Center Utah, as has been mentioned. We are the economic development organization in the state that focuses on developing international business. In that capacity, we are the STEP grant administrator for the state of Utah, as Eddie mentioned. And we We also provide other services, including consulting on market entry. Jennifer mentioned how important that is for her, or how important that is generally in her view. And we've turned that into a for-fee service here at the World Trade Center Utah, consulting with many companies on how to choose a market and then how best to enter them. But we also work with many, many other partners in Team Utah. The Governor's Office of Economic Development deserves mentioning. They have a great free consulting service to help Utah businesses develop applications for SBIR and STTR grants. And as a result, Utah companies have a success rate getting grants that's higher, significantly higher than average. And we attribute that a lot to the advice of the Governor's Office of Economic Development on writing those grants. But we have many other partners. Obviously, key among those is SBA itself for both the STEP grants and the SBIR and STTR grants, but also other groups. The State International Development Organization, SIDO, is an organization of economic development groups, international economic development groups, and they really help economic development groups grow, share best practices, get bootstrapped on new programs as we once were learning how to take advantage of STEP grants and administer them successfully. We now feel we've got that down to a pretty good science. We're very grateful that the SBA rewards administrators who use the grants successfully to grow business. The more successful companies like Jennifer's are in growing, the more grants that we can receive from SBA, and the more we can hand out. And so it's really a really nice virtuous cycle. And again, we're very, very thankful to SIDO for helping us get going in that program years ago. But other groups include the Commercial Service and, last but not least, the University of Utah. And if you could just turn the page, the University of Utah is the premier research university here in the state. They're a global leader in research in many key areas. And Research Park is a key element to the University of Utah's success. It's one of the oldest research parks in the country. It was dubbed Bionic Valley for its work on medical devices in the 1980s. And it is here in the same region as Silicon Slopes, which is another organization here in Utah, which is just a little bit south of the city of Salt Lake, and is home to over 7,000 tech companies. And so an area of great growth and great partner with Research Park. Research Park itself is a sleeping giant, housing more than 48 companies alongside 81 academic departments at the University of Utah, employing a workforce of more than 14,000. And as a result, the Utah Research Park and Utah's general success make this a great venue to host. And if you can turn the page, this year's Association of University Research Parks International Conference. And many of you may be interested in joining the conference. It is going to be an in-person event here in Salt Lake City, Utah. It's taking place from October 18th to 21st. There's a pre-day on the 17th for arrivals. You can register on this site. The registration doesn't open until June. But I encourage you to go to the site to learn more about the event and check back in June to register. And I'll just say that the event is a great opportunity for collaborative sessions and discussions to really learn to build competencies around economic development and leveraging innovation and entrepreneurship. You'll gain exposure to thought leaders and surface new ideas, and hopefully come away inspired. And as host here in Utah, I will also say it will be a great opportunity to come. The fall is a beautiful time to be in Utah. And besides access to all of the content of the conference, we're going to make sure that you get a good introduction to Utah, both what we have to offer in the city of Salt Lake City, but also from the nearby mountains. And it should be a great time to get away, to learn, but also to relax and enjoy what Utah has to offer. So I hope you check us out on this link, through this link, and can find a way to register and join us in October. And on that, I'll turn it back to you, Brian.
Great. Thank you, David. This
welcome.
has been a great overview of a lot of resources. I think one of the key things is to check with the SBA main office, but also check with the local offices like in Utah. I mean, I know I work with the Maryland Department of Commerce with their STEP program, and they offer some special services for the University of Maryland Business School. And I think across the country, you'll find local additional assets that you really should make sure you check your local state or region to see how they may augment the federal SBA resources that are quite considerable that you heard. So with that, we've reached the end of our time. I want to thank Brittany, Tony, Eddie, Jennifer, and David for a great session that provided a lot of information. The AURP team in Arizona, Vicki and Diana, who were behind the scenes helping out. And don't forget about our June 8th BioHealth Caucus. If you are in the bio area, small or large, consider signing up for that. And as David and others have mentioned, we will meet in Utah in October. So with that, I think we reached 3:15 or 3:17. We're 2 minutes over. There's again a slide about the October conference. It's going to be great. Small and large businesses are going to learn a lot, and it'll be great to meet you in person there in Utah. So with that, we're going to call it a close. Thank you all, and have a good rest of the day.